Masechet Shevuot, Daf Mem Bet. We are in the middle of a series of various case stories of claims that are protested. So here's the next case. Hahu de'amar le'lechavre habli shit me'azuzeh de'masik nabach. A claimant says, give me the 600 zuz that you owe me. Amar le vela peratich me'a chabe afse tekaimi beshita shita. The defendant said, didn't I already pay you 100 kav of gall nuts? These are gall nuts and they're made into various things like ink. And he says, I already paid you 100 kav of gall nuts, and when I gave it to you, they were worth 6 dinar each. And therefore, I paid you the value of 600 zuz, so that's it. I don't owe you anything else. But the claimant says, no, when you gave them to me, the market price was 4 zuz per kav. So that's only 400, so you still owe me another 200 zuz. And he brought 2 witnesses that said, indeed, at the time that the defendant paid the gall nuts were 4 zuz per kav, so he only paid 400. So we see that he still owes money. Amar Rava huchzak kafran. Rava says, because the defendant said a lie. He said that they were worth 6 at the time, but now we know from witnesses that they were worth 4. So now he gets the presumption of being a liar, and he won't be believed when he swears. Amar Rami bar Chama ha'amar kol mileta deladam ya'aledi inishla alav ada'ata. Rami bar Chama says, why are you calling him a liar? Didn't we establish the principle, this was at the end of the previous stuff, that anything that is not incumbent upon a person to remember is not on his mind. If it's not such an important thing, then he's not necessarily going to remember it. So maybe it was an honest mistake. He just forgot. He thought it was 6, but really it was 4. So he made a mistake. Why should we say that now he's not a trustworthy person? Rava answered that the market price, everyone remembers. Anyone who has some stock portfolio, you remember when it went up to 50, when it went down to 25, you remember exactly how much it was, especially if you paid someone at that time with it. So, in fact, he knew he was lying, and therefore he's not believed anymore. Because of that, the claimant has a case, and therefore can say, listen, you only paid me 400, you have to give me the rest of the 200, and he will have that rightful claim. Next case. Claimant comes and says, give me the 100 dinar that you owe me, and here is the document, the loan document. Amarle peraticha. But the defendant says, I already paid you back. And the claimant says, indeed, you did give me 100 zuz, but that was payment for a side deal, sitra, meaning something on the side. That was for a different deal altogether, where I lent you money separately, and that you paid me back for, yes indeed. But this thing, you didn't pay me back for. Amar Rav Nachman, itra shetara. Rav Nachman said, listen, he has a document, so the loan document still exists, and therefore still has some value, but it's weakened from the fact that even the claimant is admitting that he did receive money. That weakens the strength of the document, and because of that, the lender, the claimant, will have to make a vow in order to collect. He will be able to collect because he does have a document. Rapapa Amar Rapapa says no, his document is not weakened because he has a document. If indeed this guy paid back the loan for this particular document, then he should have gotten a receipt or taken that document and ripped it up. And he didn't do that, so the document's here. So what if he paid back something else that has nothing to do with this? Now Rapapa, who said that in the previous case, the loan document is not weakened, how come in the following case he's going to say it is weakened, and it looks like a similar case? Begins the same way. Claimant says, give me the 100 zuz that you owe me, and here is a document. Amar le'elav atorei habat li ve'atit ve'iti bat amascheta ve'kabilat zuzach. And the defendant says, didn't you give me that money, that 100 zuz, in order to go and buy cattle to invest? You were investing with me, and we bought cattle, and then we brought it to the slaughterhouse, and you were sitting next to me in the slaughterhouse where we made a profit, and I gave you back your money. So what do you mean? I already paid you back. So he has a loan document. He still has the document, but the defendant says, you were with me and you paid it back. Amar le hanhu sitra'e ninhu. And the claimant said, yes, indeed, you did pay me that money in the slaughterhouse and all that, but that was for a separate deal, and this loan document is for another deal, and so you still owe me. Amar papa itra shetara. The papa, it says in this case, the loan document is weakened, and he will have to make a vow in order to collect. So what's the difference? Don't these two cases look the same? How can a papa says in the first case that the loan document is not weakened, and here he says it is weakened? And the answer is hatam kevan de kamar atorei habit li umi toreh shekalat itra shetara hacha emor sitra eninhu. And the answer is that in this second case, since the debtor says, it agrees, you gave me the money for the oxen and you took payment from the oxen, and the creditor agreed, so both parties agree that there was this whole case. And therefore, it seems most likely that the payment, that this loan that he has a document for, was indeed for this very deal that they were making with the cattle in the slaughterhouse, and there is not a side deal. In other words, because he admits, the claimant admits, that there was this investment, there was this loan, there was this payment back, it makes the most sense that the same document is for that very same deal, and therefore his loan document is weakened. He can still collect because he does still have a document, but he has to vow first. Whereas in the first case, the defendant didn't say what the loan was for. He didn't produce any scenario and say, oh, you invested in this thing and then I paid you back. He just said, I paid you back. And therefore, there's no reason to assume that the payment that he gave was for the very same thing that the loan document was for. It could very well be that the loan document was for one thing and the payment was for something else, because he didn't talk about any specific scenario. And the second one, he said, look, there was this scenario and that's what it was for. And everybody agrees that they had the scenario, and he gave money and he got money and he gave money back. And so it's likely that there's just one and the loan document is referring to that one. But in the first one, where it's not identified what he used the money for, so it could very well be that there's two different loans that were out, and he has a document for one, and the other one he paid back. Well, that's why it would make sense that he still has a loan document, because that one wasn't paid. So there's less of a reason to say that the document is weakened in that case. So Rav Papa is in fact consistent. He's looking very carefully at the details of each case. Okay, well, now what's the bottom line in this halacha? Rav Papi amar la itra shetara, Rav Sheshet bered Rav Idi amar itra shetara. So Rav Papi says the loan document is not weakened in such cases. Rav Sheshet, the son of Rav Idi, says it is weakened. And the bottom line halacha is that the loan document is weakened. And this halacha, that the loan document is weakened, that's only true if the lender paid back in front of witnesses, and no one ever mentioned the loan document, so that's why he didn't get the loan document back. But he does have proof that he paid back, and so the lender can't say, I don't know what you're talking about, I didn't get money. He has to admit that there is money, so that's the only thing he could say is, oh, that was for a different loan, but that sounds suspicious, so that's why he make him vow, and the loan document is weakened. However, if the borrower paid back not in front of witnesses, just between the borrower and the lender, just them two, then we have a migo argument that the lender can say, I never got money from you. I have a loan document. You just claimed that you paid back. I never received any money. I don't know what you're talking about. And then he would be believed for sure because he has a loan document and the borrower has no proof that he paid back. So since he would be believed if he said that, he's also believed if he says, yes, I did get payment, but that was for a different loan that you owed me for. And this is in accordance with another story that we read about in Masechet Ketubot from Avimi, the son of Rabbi Abu. Same thing happened there. So because there are no witnesses to the payment, he could say there was no payment, and then he'd be believed. So he's also believed to say that was for a different loan document. But if there were witnesses to the repayment, then he can't say that anymore. In that case, he can still claim that was for a different loan, but the document is weakened, and so he will have to swear first before receiving payment. The next case is where a borrower tells a lender, I will believe you anytime you say that I didn't pay. In other words, if I come and say I paid, if you say I didn't pay, I will pay you, and I'll believe you no matter what. So you have the upper hand. Azal sahadeh. In the end, the borrower paid in front of two witnesses, and the lender denied and said, you never paid me. Now, what do we do here? On the one hand, there's two witnesses that testify that the borrower paid. On the other hand, the borrower had told the lender, as long as the lender says he didn't get payment, then the borrower will believe the lender. So maybe we should believe the lender. So we're in a quandary here. Abaye and Rava side with the lender because the borrower said, I will believe you anytime you say, if you say I didn't pay, then I will pay, and therefore he should have to pay again, despite the witnesses. Rav Papa, however, says, no, we trust the witnesses that there was payment. It's true that the borrower said, I will believe you more over one person, over himself. I'll believe you over myself. Sometimes I'm forgetful, and if you say I didn't pay, I will trust you and I will pay. That's what the borrower told the lender. So yes, the borrower trusts the lender more than he trusts himself, but he didn't say that I will trust you over two witnesses. Two witnesses, you can give someone capital punishment based on two witnesses. So that's 100%, and therefore we believe the witnesses, and he does not have to pay again. Now we take it a step up. So a borrower tells the lender, you are believable to me like two witnesses. Anytime you say I didn't pay, then that will be equal to two witnesses who say I didn't pay, and I will have to pay. Now the borrower goes ahead and he pays the debt in front of three people, more than two. Rav Papa says in this case also, we believe the borrower, because the borrower only said, I believe you, lender, like two witnesses, but not like three, and he has three witnesses that he did pay, and three is better than two. That's Rav Papa's position. Amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua Rav Papa. However, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, objected to Rav Papa and said, Emur damre Rabbanan dazlinan batarov deot hanemi lelian umdena dechama denefishi beki etefe aval inyan edut mea ketre utre kemea. So he said, when the rabbis say we follow the majority of opinions, the more, whatever is more, that's only regarding assessing value. If you need to assess the value of a piece of land or something, and you have 10 people say it's worth this much, and 11 people say it's worth that much. So however more, if you have 30 people say it's worth that much, so you follow the majority in the case of assessing, because the more people, the more knowledge there will be, the more expertise. But when it comes to testimony, then 2 is like 100 and 100 is like 2. There's no distinction. If 2 people say this guy murdered someone, 100 say he didn't, or the other way around, though they cancel each other out. We don't believe 100 more than 2. We can give capital punishment based on 2, and that's the same as 100. And therefore, the fact that he paid in front of 3 and he said, I would believe you like 2, 2 and 3 is the same thing when it comes to testimony, and therefore we should not believe the 3 witnesses. We should say the borrower told the lender, you are believed to me like two witnesses. Two witnesses is the same as 100. So that's it. The lender should be believed and the borrower should have to pay again. That's their objection to Rav Papa. That's all one version of what we just said. There's another version. Lishana charina. The case is the same. Hahuda amar le lechavre mehemad li kebetre kol mat amart la parana azilu perae ba petilata. The borrower told the lender, "You are believable to me like two witnesses," and he went and paid in front of three witnesses. Amar papa kebetre hemne kebetilata la hemne. Papa did the same thing as in the earlier version, that he believed him like two witnesses, but not like three witnesses, and three is better than two. And therefore, the borrower does not have to pay. But now here, the objection is different. Matkif la Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. Tere keme'a ume'a tere ketere. So Rav Huna, son of Yoshua, says, what do you mean, Rav Papa? You're talking about testimony, and regarding testimony, 2 is like 100, and 100 is like 2. So that's similar to the objection we said before. But then it goes on. V'amar le kebetilata ve'azal pera'aya be'apeh be'arba'a kevanda nachit ledeot nachit ledeot. But if the borrower said to the lender originally, you are believable to me like 3 people, then he goes and pays in front of 4 people. Well, once he's saying 3 and not 2, so already he's entering into the realm of opinions. And once he did that, then the more opinions, the better. So if he said 2, which was the case over here, so then by saying you're believable to me like 2 means you're believable to me like 2 witnesses. And if it's in the as the law of witnesses, then 2 is 100 and 100 is 2, and therefore if he pays in front of 3 or 4 or 5, it won't be any better. The lender, he told the lender, you're as trustworthy to me as witnesses, and he paid. It doesn't matter that he paid in front of witnesses. He told the lender first that you're believable, and so the lender will be believed to say he didn't pay. But if initially the borrower said, you're believable to me like 3, by saying 3, then already he's not assuming the law of witnesses, but rather entering into the law of evaluations, of opinions, where he's saying, 3 or 4, and in that case, the more the better. And since he had 4 people that he paid in front of, so that is more believable than the 3, and so in that case, everybody would agree that the borrower does not have to pay again. The next part of the Mishnah taught that one does not have to make a vow because of a claim by a person who's deaf, a person who is mentally unstable, and a child. If they come and claim something and you're the defendant, you don't have to make a vow. And one cannot impose a vow on a child. Mai ta'ama, what's the source? Amar kira ki ten ish el ra'ehu kesef o kelim lishmor ve'en nitinat katan kelum. The pasuk from which we learn one of the Shevuot is if someone gives to his friend money or vessels to safeguard, and the continuation is, and then he says he loses it, so he has to make a vow. It says ish, only if you give it to an adult, but if you give something to a child to watch for you, so then that's not, the giving something to a child is not considered legally recognizable, and therefore, because he's not mentally competent, and therefore the child does not have to make a vow. So the whole laws of these vows is only if it's 2 adults, but if either the claimant or the defendant is a child, then there is no vow imposed. We now quote the next part of the Mishnah that seems to contradict this line that one does not make a vow because of a claim of a child. The next part says, Aval nishba'in lakatan ve'lahekdesh. This part of the Mishnah says that one does have to make a vow. So that we ask about that. That didn't we just say in the Mishnah that one does not make a vow because of a claim of a someone who is not all there and a child? And here you say that you do make a vow because of a claim of a child. So Rav explains, is talking about someone who is coming to make a claim on behalf of his father who is deceased. And so this child, it's not his own claim that he's coming to make, but rather that the defendant owed money to his father, and he's coming because of that. So a child cannot do a transaction. He can't accept an item as a deposit or give an item as a deposit that would require the other person to make a vow. However, if the father made such a transaction and now the son is only coming to claim what belonged to the father, then that claim can trigger an oath by the defendant. And this would follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer, Pamim she'adam nishba al ta'anat asmo. In the Braita, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, sometimes a person has to make a vow by his own admission. His own claim means here his own admission. Even if nobody else came to claim against him, and he came to admit something. How so? Kesad. Amar lo maneh le'avicha biyadi ve'echaltiv peras. Hareh zeh nishba. Ve'zeu shenishba al ta'anat asmo. If someone goes to an orphan and said, I owed your father 100 zuz, but I already paid him half. So he is modeh b'miksat. Although the child did not make any claim, he's coming on his own to return what is rightfully belongs to the orphan because he owed it to his father. Nevertheless, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he has to make a vow because it is in any case modeh b'miksat, and that's what he means by someone has to make a vow because of his own admission. Chachamim disagree and say this is like returning a lost object. This guy who had this money did not have to come at all. No one made a claim against him, so he could just keep it. The fact that he's coming on his own and making an admission, that's like returning a lost item. A who returns a lost item doesn't have to make a vow. Here, I'm returning all of it. And if he says, oh, you didn't return all of it, there was more money in the wallet, he doesn't have to make a claim because he's coming to return it. No one made a claim against him. And therefore, Chamim say, he does not have to. So, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're saying this part of the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that's why he has to make a vow, because he's coming on his own and making an admission to a child. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, how come he does not agree with Chachamim to say that he is returning a lost item? He's coming on his own. There was no claim. So he should not have to make a vow. Rav says, no, in fact, this he is talking about a case where the child did make a claim. Okay, so he made a claim, and then the other guy admitted, says, yes, I did owe, but I paid half, so that's a typical modeh b'miksat. So now that we know that's a katan who made a claim, so we go back to the question and ask, katan v'hamat en nishben al ta'anat chereshote v'katan. You already said that we do not make a vow because of a claim of someone who is deaf or insane or a child. So how come over here, the katan made a claim, and you're saying that one does have to make a vow? So back to that question. Leolam gadol. Oh no, in fact, they're talking about an adult. The orphan is an adult. If so, why calling him a child if it's talking about an adult? Because compared to his father, he is a child. Even in English, you might have a 80-year-old who has a 50-year-old child, and he says, this is my child, even though they're both adults. So too, we're talking about, with regard to his father's matters, he is the child of his father. So in Hebrew, you wouldn't call him by himself a katan, but if he's dealing with his father's business and his father died, so he is called a katan. That's why. But in fact, is an adult. Now, why are you calling this his own claim, like his own admission? In fact, if it's an adult and the adult is coming and making a claim, it's an adult orphan making a claim on behalf of his father. So this is a claim from someone else. Well, why does it say ta'anat atzmo in that baraita? And the answer is ta'anat echerim v'hoda'at atzmo. Yeah, that's what it means. So, someone else's claim, but his own admission. And because of his own admission, he has to make a vow. We ask about that. Every case of modeh b'miksat, that's the typical case when someone makes a claim and the other person has a partial admission. So this case then is no different from any other case. Ela, not everybody has the word ela, but if you want to read it, it seems to be saying, rather, you know what, we'll say it is in fact talking about a child. And a child's claim is not an official claim, and that's why we call it here his own admission. So, in fact, this is talking about a child who made the claim, and that's why Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov calls it his own admission. And what is the basis of the machloket? And the argument in that baraita between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Chachamim, it has to revolve around the logic of Rabbah. Because Rabbah said, why does the Torah require a vow for someone who makes a partial admission? Because it's strange. If someone denies that they owe anything at all, they don't have to make a vow. But if they admit to part, now they do have to make a vow that they don't owe the rest of it. And it's based on an assumption that most people are not so insolent to tell someone that they owe money to, I don't owe you anything at all. There are liars that can do that with a straight face and say, I don't owe you anything, even though everybody knows they owe. He knows himself. But most people are not don't have such chutzpah. So therefore, this defendant, although he would want to say, I deny everything, I don't owe you anything, but the reason why he says, oh, I owe you only part of it, is because he doesn't have the chutzpah to deny completely that he owes anything. And really, he wants to admit everything. We're talking about a person who is basically honest, and let's say the guy comes and says, you owe me $100. He would love to be able to admit and pay, but he doesn't have the money right now. And so the reason why he's not admitting the entire debt is he's trying to avoid paying him for now. סבר, עד הבלי זוזה ופרענה לה, ורחמנה אמר, רמי שבוע לווה, כי הכי דלא דלה בכולי. He says, you know what, listen, I have $50, I'll tell him I owe you 50, and I'll deny the rest of the 50 to get him off my back. And then next month when I get a paycheck, when I get the rest, then I'll come and I'll admit, and I'll give him the rest. A person can justify saying half a lie. Most people won't make a total lie. I don't know who you are, I never borrowed anything, I don't owe you anything. Most people don't do that. But most people can bend the truth somewhat, exaggerate, say amount that's really less. Oh, no, I do owe you, yeah, but no, it's only 50, right? Here's 50, and leave me alone for now. In their mind, they're not stealing and being totally dishonest because it's half a truth and they mean to pay later. But that is still, in fact, a lie. And therefore, the Torah says, let's make him take a vow so that he will admit everything. If he's going to take a vow about it, then he's going to be scared. Most people are not going to even make this half lie if they are going to make a vow. And therefore, he knows he's going to have to admit it. So he says, okay, yeah, I really do owe everything. And then, all right, we'll figure something out, make a payment plan. Maybe he really does have the money. We'll find a way, but we don't want him to go get away with a lie. That's the reasoning. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov sabar, lashana bo v'lashana bivno eno me'iz. Now Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that this logic, this psychology, applies both to a person both to when the defendant is speaking to the person to whom he actually owes money, the original lender, and also to his son. A person also would not be so brazen-faced to lie completely to the son, to the orphan, and say, I didn't owe your father anything. And therefore, this is not called returning a lost item, because the kid came and said, didn't you owe my father some money? And he's not going to be so brazen, so he's not going to lie, and therefore he's going to have to say, oh yes, I did. And so that's why he's admitting to part of it, and so he has to make a vow. That's why Rabbi Eliezer says he has to make a vow. The same logic that applies to admitting to an adult and the original person would apply to the child, even though the child only inherited this requirement to pay. Whereas the rabbis say, no, a person is going to be embarrassed to deny completely something he owes to the original debtor that he owes to. He's not going to say, I don't owe you anything. But if that person died, and now his son is coming and saying, you owe my father, now already the son wasn't actually there, may not actually know, and so a person will be so insolent generally to deny and say, I don't know, I didn't owe your father anything. He's not even here to give a face of shame, so he's not so ashamed to say, I don't owe you anything, since he a person would lie and say, I don't owe you anything. The fact that he says, oh, I owe half of it, so we believe him because that's like returning a lost item. He would have gotten away with everything because he would not be embarrassed to lie completely. So that's the difference in psychology, and that explains the difference between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbanan. Now you just said that this last line in the Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But earlier in the Mishnah, it said that if someone says, Manele Abba, you owed my father $100, and then the borrower says, no, I only owed $50. He's not liable because he's simply returning a lost item. So we see that earlier in the Mishnah it says that the Shevuot of Modeh b'miksat only applies when it's the original lender that's making the claim, but not the orphan, and that follows Chachamim against Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So what's going on? And the answer is Hatam de la Amad Barili, Hachad Amad Barili. No, in that case, before when it says Patur, that's when the son says, I'm not sure. He says, I think maybe you owed my father. I think there was some kind of dealing. Is that right or wrong? And in that case, a person would say, no, there was nothing, because the orphan is not even certain. And that's why, in that case, if he admits to something, that's Meshiv Aveda, and there's no vow. However, in this case, that we said is the end of the Mishnah, which is we said is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that's when the orphan comes and says, I know for sure that this is the case. My father told me, or I was there, and so I saw a document, and so I know for sure that you owed me. In that case, a person would not be so brazen to say, no, there was nothing here at all. And therefore, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would agree regarding both cases. It makes a difference. If the orphan claims that I am not sure, then that's Meshav Aveda. But if he says, I'm sure, then the borrower has to make a vow. Shemuel amar lekatan, lipara minichse katan, lekdesh lipara minichse hekdesh. Shemuel reads this line in the Mishnah completely differently, and says, when it says that one makes a vow to a katan, it means if someone wants to get paid from a katan, the katan is not the claimant, but the other way around. Someone is making a claim against the inheritance of this orphan, and he says, listen, your father owed me, I want you to come and pay me. And he brings whatever proof he has in order to collect from the property of a child who inherited. He has to make a vow, and that's true for the katan. It's also true for hekdesh. If someone comes and says, listen, this thing that was, someone consecrated their property, but really that person owed me money, and he wants to come to the temple treasury to collect that money, he has to make a vow because he's taking something from the temple treasury, and so that's something serious. And he has to make a vow. Now, following this, we challenge Shemuel's interpretation, because we already know this from a Mishnah coming up later in this Masechet, where it says that if someone wants to collect from the property of orphans, he cannot get paid unless he makes a vow. So why do I need to teach this twice? Hakamash malan kide abaye keshisha detane abaye keshisha. Oh, we're learning a new halacha here, in accordance with the elder Abaye, who said, Yetomim shamru gedolim ben tzarich lomar ketanim ben lishwa ben leziburit. He says, when it says orphans, it's actually not talking about children, but even adults. And that's true. And if you have to make a vow to collect from adult orphans, then all the more so regarding child orphans. And that's true both to require the claimant to make a vow, and also that when he's going to collect, he only gets inferior land, because you're taking from the land from property of orphans. The collector only gets inferior quality lands, which is not true regarding if it's just a regular property. Then one can get higher land, medium, or in case of damages, the best land. But here, because it's coming from orphans, so they only have to pay with inferior land. And that's why we have two Mishnayot to teach us this, to teach us this chidush, that if we only had one, I would only know it applies to adults, and now I know it applies to minor orphans as well. להקדש להיפרע מנכסי הקדש, תננה, מנכסים משובדים לא ייפרעו, אלא בשבועה. ומה לי משובדים להדיוט, ומה לי משובדים לגבוה. Now you said you have to make a vow in order to collect from Hekdesh. But I also can figure that out myself from that same Mishnah coming up later, where it says, if someone is collecting from property that can be used as a lien, meaning from land, it is not paid unless one makes a vow. And what would be the difference between something that is lien property, lien to another person, or if it's lien to Hekdesh, it's consecrated? The point is that even though this property, I'm controlling it now, someone else has a claim on it. And the claim might be another person because it has a lien, or the claim might be the Bet HaMikdash because it was consecrated. But so those are similar enough that if the Mishnah teaches that one has to make a vow regarding one, then I could figure out myself that you have to make a vow if you're collecting for the other. So why do I need this Mishnah here to teach us that? Istarich sakadatecha mina hejot hu da adam oseh kinunya al hejot. Aval hekdesh en adam oseh kinunya al hekdesh kamashma lan. I need it because I might have thought that when it comes to getting money from a regular person, a person might collude. In other words, you have someone who owns property, and that property is liened out to someone else, and or he sold it to someone else, and now this guy, he wants to take that money, he wants to get that property illegally. So he could collude with someone, and he goes to someone who will make believe that he's a lender, and maybe they did have a loan already, and you already paid it back, but they still have the document. So he says, let's not rip up the document. Let's make believe that I didn't pay you back, and then you'll come and make a claim against me, even though I already paid it back, but I'll agree to it, and you'll come and make a claim, and I'll say I have no money, and then because you have a document, you can go and collect that property. You'll go collect that property, and then we'll split it, and that guy will be out of his land. And so we're afraid that people are going to be colluding like that. Therefore, if somebody wants to come and collect from property, they have to make a vow that it's really coming to them to avoid collusion. So we understand why you would need it in that case. If it's talking about nechasim meshubadim to someone else, that's that Mishnah. But we need this Mishnah here to teach us that's true also for Hekdesh, because I might have thought that when it comes to Hekdesh, a person's not going to make a collude. Someone had property that he went and consecrated, and then he's going to go make a collusion and say, hey, why don't you say that I owe you this, and really that fact that I made Hekdesh but doesn't belong to Hekdesh because it was already owed, it was already lien to somebody else, and they take it and we'll split the profits. A person's not going to do that against the temple treasury, collude and steal from the Bet HaMikdash. We would think people wouldn't do that, but in fact we are afraid that people will do that, and that's why this Mishnah has come to teach that one has to make a vow before collecting from consecrated property as well. We ask about this. Wait a second, but Rav Huna says that if someone's on his deathbed and he consecrated all of his property, he's on his deathbed, he doesn't need anything, he consecrates everything. But he does say that I owe this person 100 dinar, right? So everything's consecrated except that they're going to have to give this money to that person. So he is believed. The guy on his deathbed is believed because we assume a person is not going to make collude against Hekdesh. This guy on his deathbed is not going to make a collusion with that guy and say, hey, listen, I'll say that I owe this to you. You'll get the money and then you'll give me half. Here he is believed and he doesn't have to make a vow. So how come here he's believed? And the answer is, that's talking about someone on his deathbed. Someone does not going to make a sin and collude when he's not going to benefit. He's about to die. So he's not going to go make a sin so he can get money when he's about to die. So there we believe him. But if it's someone who's healthy, then we are afraid that he's going to say, listen, I made this thing consecrated. Now I want the money back. How am I going to get it back? I'll collude with that guy and I'll get the money from Hekdesh. No, we don't want people to do that. People might do that because they're alive and they will benefit from it. And that's why we impose a vow also on someone who's trying to collect from Hekdesh. Next Mishnah, ve'elu devrim she'en nishba'in alehen. The following is a list of items for which one does not make a vow. If someone else claims that you owe the following things, you do not Shevuot bikadon, and not modeh b'miksat, and if they have one witness, you don't have to make a vow to defend yourself for any of these. None of the three biblical vows apply to ha'avadim, ve'ashetarot, ve'akarkaot, ve'ahekdeshot. If someone says, you owe the slaves, you don't have to make a vow. Or if they say you have to give me this document, a physical document that you stole or you owe them, or land, or things that were consecrated. And behem tashlumei kefel v'lo tishmar ba'avar chamisha shomer chinam eno nishba noseh sachar eno mishalem. And also, if someone would steal any of these things, they do not have to pay a fine of double. And if it's an animal, let's say an animal that was made hekdesh, and someone steals it and slaughters it or sells it, he does not have to pay 4 or 5 times. And if a person is a shomer chinam and it gets lost or stolen, they do not have to make a vow. And if they're a paid shomer, then they do not have to pay for such an item being lost. Rabbi Shimon Omer, kodashim shechaya b'achriutan nishba'in alehen, v'she'eno chaya b'achriutan en nishba'in alehen. Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says it depends what kind of ekdesh it is. If it's an animal for which one is responsible, there's 2 ways to make an animal consecrated. One can say this animal is consecrated, and in that case only this animal is consecrated. If it gets lost or stolen or something gets a blemish or whatever, he doesn't have to replace it. But he can say, I have to bring an animal, I have to bring a korban, and then he says, okay, this will be my korban. If it gets lost or stolen or blemished, then he's responsible to replace it. So if he has a responsibility to replace it, then that has monetary value for him. If it gets stolen, then if someone takes it or denies it and so on, then there is they will have to make a vow. Let's say I have one witness and this person stole it and it was an animal for which I am responsible. So him by stealing it, I'm going to have to pay out of my own pocket for it. So that therefore I can impose a vow. But if it's an animal that I am not responsible to replace because I made a vow about this particular animal, so then I'm not going to have to pay a pocket anyway. In that case, I cannot impose a vow on the defendant. Rabbi Meir Omer, yesh devrim she'en b'karka ve'enan kekarka ve'en chachamim modim lo. Rabbi Meir says there are some things that are on the ground or in the ground, but they are not like the ground. Chachamim disagree with this. Kesad esed gefanim te'onot masarti lecha. V'hala omer enan ela hamesh. For example, a claimant comes and says, I gave you 10 vines full of grapes, and you owe them back to me. And the defendant says, no, you only gave me 5. Rabbi Meir mechayev shevuot. Chamim omrim kol mechubad lakarka harei hu kekarka. Rabbi Meir says one has to make a vow of modeh b'miksat, because even though the vines are connected to the ground, we don't look at the vines. The main thing is the grapes, and the grapes are movable items, and therefore that's called modeh b'miksat, and he has to make a vow. But Chamim say no, as long as it's connected to the ground, it's like the ground itself. And even though the grapes soon are going to be plucked off and be movable items, right now they're connected to the ground, and therefore they are like the ground, and one does not make a vow regarding land. And nishbayin ela al davar shebemidah shemishkal shebeminyan. One only makes a vow regarding something that is defined by size, weight, or number. And you say, you owe me this much, 10, whatever it is. And the person says, no, only 7. Then that's called modeh b'miksat. But if it's not a definite amount, if it's not measurable, then there's no modeh b'miksat vow. Kesad, bait maleh masarti lecha, v'chis maleh masarti lecha, v'hala omer eni yodea, אלא מה שהנחת אתה נוטל פטור. זה אומר עד הזיז, וזה אומר עד החלון חייב. For example, if someone says, I gave you a room full of produce or a pouch full of money, and the other one says, I don't know if it was full or not full, but here's the pouch, here's the house as it was, whatever you gave me, I am giving back to you. So full or not full is not a definite amount. That's not a number number, and so that doesn't count. But if someone says, I gave you a storage house full of this item and it was up to the ledge, and the other one says, no, it was not up to the ledge, it was only up to the window, then one is liable, even though it's not a number, but it's a definite line. It's something measurable. You could see up to the ledge, up to the window are different amounts. So if it's just amorphous, like full, how much is full? So I don't know if it's totally full, very full, not so full. So that's not considered a definite amount, but up to a certain line is a definite amount. Tashlumei kefil minelan. Now, how do you know that one is not liable to a double payment regarding all these things that were listed? Tetanur banan. Al kol devar pesha kilal. Al shor al chamor al sev al salma pirat. Al kol aveda hazar vechalal. It says in the pasuk in Shemot regarding double payment for any matter of trespass, something that someone steals, whether it be for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for clothing. So start off with the kalal, any matter, and then it mentioned certain items: ox, donkey, sheep, clothing. So that's pirat, and then it said any manner of lost thing. If someone stole it, they have to pay double. So this is a kilal upiratu chilal. E'atadan ela ke'aina pirat. Ma pirat meforash davar hamitaltel v'gufo mamon. Af kol davar hamitaltel v'gufo mamon. So this is a generality followed by details followed by generality, and the rule is that we generalize all things that are similar in some fundamental way to the particular examples. So these examples that were in there, different animals and clothing, these are items that are movable and have intrinsic value. So we are going to exclude from a double payment anything that is not either of both of these things. So only things that are movable and have intrinsic value. What are we going to exclude? Yasu karkaot and mitaltelin. Yasu abadim shukshu lekarkaot. We will exclude land because it's not movable. And we're also going to exclude slaves, even though physically you can't move a slave around, but there's a connection between the laws of slaves and land. Yasu shetarot she'af al pi shehen mitaltelin and gufan mamon. We're also going to exclude documents because even though they are movable, but they don't have intrinsic value. They're only value because it says of some words in it, you owe me $1 million, but the paper and the ink itself are not intrinsically valuable. Hekdesh re'ayu ketiv, and also we're going to exclude hekdesh because it says his friend. So that's talking about something that someone else owns, your friend, but not the Bet HaMikdash. Velo tashlumei kefil velo arba'a v'chamisha. My ta'ama, and you also don't make a vow regarding payment of 4 or 5 if it's an animal that a hekdesh animal that someone stole and slaughtered. One does not pay 4 and 5. Why not? Because the pasuk says you have to pay 4 and 5 and not 3 or 4. Since we already established that you don't pay double, that double payment for someone stealing something is included within the 4 and 5. The 4 and 5 is three times more. Another besides the kefel, the principal plus 1. So then every thief has to pay those 2, no matter what they steal. But if it's an animal and they slaughter it, then they have to pay another 2 or another 3. And then since we already excluded the double payment, so then he's not going to have to pay the double payment. So what's going to be left? Well, he has to pay the principal for sure, and then either another 3 or another 4. But that's not the Torah law. So according to Torah law, either you pay, it's a case where you pay 4 or 5, depending on if it's an ox or a sheep. But once you don't have to pay the double, then it's not going to be 4 and 5, it's going to be 3 or 4. So it doesn't fit into the Torah law, and therefore one would be exempt. Shomer chinam eno nishpa. The Mishnah continued and said that an unpaid shomer does not have to make a vow if something was lost or stolen. If regarding any of these items, usually he does. How do you know? Detan Rabbanan. Kiten ish el re'ayehu kelal. Kesef o kelim perat. Lishmor chazar vekalal. Kelal uperat uchelal. E'atadan ela ke'ena perat. Ma perat meforash davar hamitaltel v'gufo mamon. Af kol davar hamitaltel v'gufo mamon. Yasu karkaot she'en mitaltelin. Yasu abadim shukshu lekarkaot. Yasu shetarot. Shaf al pi shemitaltelin en gufan mamon. Hekdesh re'ayehu ketiv. So the pasuk says regarding a shomer. If someone gives to his friend, that's a generality, giving anything. And then it says particulars, kesef or kelim, and those are examples, money or utensils. To watch, that means to watch anything. So that's a kalal, uperat ukelal. We're going to judge what's included based on something that's fundamentally similar to the examples. Just like the examples are things that are movable and have intrinsic value, so too anything that is movable has intrinsic value. If a shomer chinam has them and loses them or they get stolen, he has to make a vow. But that excludes land because it's not movable, and avadim because those are compared to land in their legal definition, and that also excludes documents because they, even though they're movable but they don't have intrinsic value, we're also going to exclude ekdesh because the pasuk says to his neighbor, Re'ayehu, someone else's property and not the property of hekdesh. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.